It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
You have seen him on Fox News. He is the host of The Next Revolution. His name is Steve Hilton. He's also an author of the new book, Positive Populism, Revolutionary Ideas to Rebuild Economic Security, Family, and Community in America. And he joins us now this morning on Conduit News. Steve, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you.
So tell us what motivated you to write this new book, Positive Populism.
So this word populism, we've been hearing it for the last few years when we talk about politics. You heard it, obviously, in connection with Donald Trump's election, the way he beat all the establishment Republicans in the primary. You heard it in the UK with the Brexit vote and also with Bernie Sanders on the left. And now you're seeing it used to describe all these election results in Europe where the old guard is being kicked out and people are looking for a big sweeping change. And so you hear this word populism. And up till now, I think people, when they think about it, see it in terms of what it's against. Populists are against the elites. They're against bad trade deals and the rigged economy and uncontrolled immigration and so on. What I wanted to do was say, okay, those are all legitimate grievances, and people are right to be angry at the way things have been run because people have had a raw deal. If you think about the last few decades, the rich have got richer and richer, but working people, their incomes have been flat or falling for about 44 years. That's what the statistics show. And there's been an agenda put forward by Republicans and establishment Democrats, establishments on both sides, which has been enthusiastic about globalization and automation and, as I said, uncontrolled immigration, the centralization of power in the economy and in government. All these things have really benefited those at the top, people who work in the knowledge economy and in the thriving urban centers on the coast of America. They've done really well, but the rest of the country has been left behind by all that. So people are right to be angry, but what I wanted to do was say not just what populism is against, but what is it for? What is a positive agenda, a set of ideas that will actually help deal with the problems, to give people that economic security that seems to have been taken away from them over the last 2 years, that's going to help people get opportunity, that's going to deal with big problems like family breakdown, the way communities have had their power taken away, the way that our political system is so corrupt. What are we going to do to change that? What are the practical solutions? And that's what you'll find in my book, Positive Populism.
As I'm reading it, I know it's available at Amazon.com. I'm reading the synopsis here. The last paragraph is very intriguing to me, Steve. It says, for too long, populism has been defined by those who despise it.
Yes.
It really is this concept that just screams elitism. It's like there's a disdain for what the people, the majority of the people want, and we need them to manage our lives for us.
That's exactly right. And you've had this terrible patronizing condescension towards regular working people who just want the basic things, right? They want to know that if they work hard, they can live on what they earn. They want decent schools for their kids. They want a chance to get on. They want safety and security. They want to know that the borders are being protected, that we don't just have a free-for-all where you have immigration at such a level that it's undermining economic security, and it's also changing the way that people think about society too quickly in a way that people can't accept and get used to. And all of those things are perfectly reasonable concerns. And yet the elitists who have driven forward the policies that they benefit from, but the people who suffer complain about it, then they just describe them as racist, and they dismiss the whole thing and say, well, you're just racist, you're nativist, you're just, you've got to get with the program. This is the modern world. Suck it up. And I find that so offensive because they've designed a world that works for them. But for most people, it doesn't work, and that's why we need to change it. We need to actually it's not just a change of policy. One of the things that comes out of my book very strongly is we got to undermine the power structures of elitism, the way that they've put together this alliance. I call it the axis of elitism between big government and big business, the way that the administrative state and the bureaucracy supports power staying in the hands of those at the top. We've got to change all of that. And that's why they don't like it, by the way. That's why they're so dismissive of the concerns and so desperate. You see it now in Washington, so desperate to cling on to their power because they don't like the idea of losing power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely seems like, they do have a disdain for populism. I think there is probably no more clear example of that than the election of President Donald Trump and everything that seems to be being done to thwart his agenda, to thwart the will of the American people. And you're seeing that now with the slow Brexit, if a Brexit ever happens at all.
Exactly. Because the people, in the elitists who love the idea of centralizing power in Brussels, in the European Union, taking power out of the hands of the people through their elected representatives and running things through the bureaucracy. They hated Brexit because it undermines their power. And so that's exactly what you're seeing happen. They're trying to basically overturn the vote. That's what's happening here too, where you've got the establishment in Washington. Again, it's not a partisan thing. You've got Republicans and Democrats the same. They can't stand. They basically think that people made a mistake. And they think, well, look, you voted for the wrong person. These policies are stupid, and we're going to stop them, regardless of what you, the electorate, may think. We know best. And so that's what they're trying to do. Now, what I set out in my book is that it's not enough just to be angry about that. You actually have to take their power away permanently, and that means undermining their structures. So, for example, there's a chapter in my book about the administrative state and the bureaucracy. And there's specific ideas for what we do. First of all, we don't really, they're so shadowy, we don't know who they are. We've got to unmask this shadowy bureaucracy. We've got to publish the names and the job descriptions and the organization charts of the bureaucracies so we can see very clearly who they are, what they're supposed to do, and who we can get rid of, either by taking their powers and transferring them to state and local government or just getting rid of them entirely. I think in the end, this is my experience working in the government back in the UK many years ago, is that you can't really reform all this. You just got to cut it, literally cut it by a huge amount, not just the 10% cut, as people sometimes talk about, but 90% cut. Get rid of them. Then you can really start to give power back to the people. So the book is full of specific ideas like that. People aren't going to agree with every single thing in the book, but the point is that we've got to have a broader-based populist movement to carry this forward. It's not just about one presidential candidate and one election. If we're going to really turn things around, we need a movement of people who believe in these ideas and who are going to run for office and change things for the long term. And that's really what I wanted to do with this book, is start that conversation and provide a basis for some ideas for this long-term populist movement.
We're talking with Steve Hilton. His new book, again, is Positive Populism: Revolutionary Ideas to Rebuild Economic Security, Family, and Community in America. He's also the host of The Next Revolution on Fox News. I know you guys out there have seen him. When you were just describing, Steve, this bureaucratic state that we're in, we've got all these guys who are lifers, they're unelected. I mean, that sounds a lot like what people are trying to describe when they come up with this term deep state. What do you think about the term deep state?
I think it's very helpful. I think it really captures something that's true about the bureaucracy. I'm going to tell you a story that is from the book, which illustrates what I'm talking about. It's from the UK again, but before I worked with David Cameron, the former Prime Minister. We actually then fell out over Brexit. He called the referendum and wanted to stay in the EU. I went back to the UK. I've been living in America now for 6.5 years. We moved my family in 2012, but I went back there to campaign for Brexit. So I completely was on the other side to him. But, previously we worked together. And before we were elected, I went to see the former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, to get his advice. He'd been out of office for a time, and I'd seen him say a few interesting things about his experience of being in government, so I wanted to just get his advice about how to do things, how to run things. And he was really interesting. He was very gracious, very helpful, and one of the things that really stuck in my mind, he said, when you get there, when you get to 10 Downing Street, right at the heart of power, you have to understand that the civil service, the bureaucracy, they genuinely see it as their civic duty, their national duty, to prevent you from implementing your policies. They see it as their duty to block the ideas of what they consider to be the here today, gone tomorrow politicians. They are the guardians of the national interest. They know how things should be run, and their goal is to block you. You have to understand that, and you have to get that from day one and be ready to fight them and beat them. And that was from a former Labour Prime Minister. And when I heard that back then, I took it very seriously and hence, got into my own battles with the civil service. But when you come right up to date here in America now, that's the deep state. That's exactly what it is. It's a group of people who believe that they know best, that they're there, they're there beyond any one administration, beyond any elected official, and they run the show, and they don't like it when their power is disturbed. And the problem is for them that up till now, certainly for the last few decades, they've had politicians come along who basically go along with them, who in the end agree to their plans. And now they've got someone in the form of Donald Trump who just doesn't accept that at all and just chucks it all out and says, no, I'm sorry, I don't agree. We're going to do it this way. And they really hate that, and that's why they're trying to undermine him at every stage. But it's very helpful, I think, that that's all now out in the open, that we're talking about the deep state. And even things like the anonymous letter in the New York Times the other week, in a way that's really helpful. It kind of proves that this talk of the deep state is not some conspiracy theory. It's real. They really are there, and they're trying to block the elected president from delivering his promises.
Yeah, they are. They're trying to basically undermine a duly elected president. And everything you just said, I completely agree with, Steve. That's exactly right. They think they know better, and it's almost like they have a disdain for our democratic process. Now, it does mention in your book about the excessive power of corporations. I'd love to get your response on this because the way I see it, the line is getting blurred between where government ends and these, quote, private corporations begin. It seems like they're kind of working together. We're certainly seeing this with the deep state in Silicon Valley right now.
Particularly for conservatives and those on the right, it's really important to understand something. Of course, we should be pro-business and pro the private sector, because without the private sector, without business, you don't have any of the wealth generated that we all take for granted, and you don't get all the products and services that make the world a better place. But as well as that, we need to be pro-market, and that means being pro-competition. And the trouble is, in too many industries today, there is not enough competition. In sector after sector of the economy, you've seen a couple or just a handful of giant corporations being allowed to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they basically use lobbyists and campaign donations in Washington to allow them to gobble up the competitors and stitch up the marketplace. And that has ended up with a situation where you've got this astronomical salaries paid, and the businesses do really well, but their workers are treated poorly and communities suffer, and it has a bad impact on society. And particularly, as you mentioned, in tech, a classic case where you've just seen a tiny number of companies become way too dominant. And so I think what we've got to do is really think, well, how do you deal with that? And the answer, I think, is to use antitrust policy to bring in much more competition, and where necessary, to break up these giant companies. And I think tech is a good example, where I think that you should start by reversing the power grabs. These companies like Google and Facebook, they've got so big by buying up other companies. So let's make Google sell YouTube and Android, the mobile phone system that it bought, and also force Facebook to sell WhatsApp and Instagram. But even then, they'll be too big. I think there's ideas in my book. Again, not everyone will agree with all of it, but I think that we've got to use the antitrust system to incentivize companies to stay competitive. And if they get too big, my suggestion is that we make them pay higher taxes. If they're too dominant, if they're basically like a monopoly, treat them like part of the public sector. Put caps on what they can pay their executives. Put a minimum on what they pay their workers. Make the regulation much tougher. If they're that dominant, then they're basically part of the government, and they shouldn't be allowed to behave as if they're risk-taking entrepreneurs.
Last question, because I know you got to go. This is unrelated to your book, but what do you make of what's going on right now with the Kavanaugh nominations to the Supreme Court? Obviously, he's now being accused by, an accuser of sexual misconduct. What are your thoughts on that, Steve?
Well, there's two things. First of all, I think it's incredibly important that we hear both sides of this story fully, because one thing that I think is really frightening is the idea that anyone can make any kind of allegation about someone, and that can immediately, without further question, end their prospects or their career. That is the rule of the mob, and we can't allow that to happen. At the same time, they are serious allegations, and so they should be treated seriously. And I think we need to have full and public hearings. We need to have the accuser make her case, and we need to have Judge Kavanaugh reply and refute them, as he's done in written statements. But I think we need to hear them both. And then the Senate process can continue. But it also needs to happen quickly. So we mustn't allow this to delay the whole process, because it's a legitimate process, as set out in the Constitution, and we need to get on with it.
I completely agree with that. The man is Steve Hilton. He is the host of The Next Revolution on Fox News. The book is Positive Populism, Revolutionary Ideas to Rebuild Economic Security, Family, and Community in America. Steve Hilton, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciated.
All righty. You have a great day. Thank you, Steve.
Bye.